Okay, so today we're going to be looking at AWS Config, and essentially, if you haven't worked with Config before, this is a service offered by AWS that allows you to more or less manage the configuration of your resources. So it provides you with an inventory of the resources that are running in your system. It shows you things such as config history. It allows you to assess all these. It allows you to govern. It allows you to audit all. The configuration of your resources. So very very nice service. And most importantly, a very good tool to help you with governance and management, so it can help you achieve certain level of compliance depending on the structure of your infrastructure or of your organization. So as you can see, I'm on the AWS config dashboard. There is quite a bit here, but essentially what would be the first step on AWS config would be to set up a number of roles against which your resources will be evaluated. That is the configuration of your resources. So for example, you can set up a role to check that every single ABS volume that is launched in your account is encrypted. So if someone tries to launch an ABS volume or even launches an ABS volume that is not encrypted, then that service will be marked as non-compliant, and then you can remediate. So that is one way to go about it. You can optionally configure automatic remediations. That is where you say, for example, if a volume is launched that is not encrypted, immediately delete that volume. So you can go either way. You can choose to do either manual remediation or to do an automatic remediation. Again, that's your preference, and according to the structure, or rather what the outcome that you'd want for your own infrastructure. So as I mentioned, there are two ways to go about this. First, you can decide to set up roles manually. So here you'd need to add in one role at a time for each check that you want to be done. And optionally, you can choose to use what we call conformance pack. And conformance packs are essentially just a package. It's a package that includes a subset of roles. So rather than go in and create a role at a time, so the conformance packs allow you to set up a number of roles. Rather, it's a package that consists of a number of roles and remediation actions, and then they allow, as you can see, they will be deployed and monitored as a single entity. But just note it's that conformance packs are actually not supported in all the regions. So there are some regions that you have to set up the roles manually. I think some, for example, a region such as Cape Town does not have support for conformance packs. This is very hard to say. Conformance packs as of yet. So as in such a case, you'd need to set up the roles manually. So in this, so that's a brief overview of AWS config. You can look more into it. There is a lot more features that are supported, but for this particular video, what happened is, so we were trying to look into something with my config with with one of my colleagues, and essentially what we wanted to do is to to introduce a new security feature into the base configuration that we do for our clients. And specifically what we wanted to do is we wanted to find a way to limit the size of instances that can be launched in an account. So at this point, you probably heard of Bitcoin mining. At this, it's become quite a security threat, especially for cloud systems. This is where bad actor gains access to your system or to your cloud environment in one way or another, and then they launch very very large instances for Bitcoin mining, and you end up with an absurd bill at the end of it. So one of the ways that we were trying to look into a way to kind of get around this by limiting the size of instances that can be launched by any user in an AWS account. So our two primary options initially was either to use AWS IAM or to use AWS Config. So for this particular video, I'm going to do this by AWS Config, and then we're also just going to test this and see if it really does work. Yeah, so in a separate video, I should be will do the same but using AWS IAM, and then we can do a comparison between the two and see which one is more suitable for accomplishing the goal that we set out to accomplish. So let's begin. So first things first, it's you need to understand that AWS config consists of a number of pre-configured roles. So as you can see, there are a very large or rather it consists of a very large collection of AWS managed roles that these are very good for a new person. Think of them as when you're new to AWS IAM, and you're trying to set up policies, you're trying to manage permissions, you're safer going with the AWS managed policies because they are configured with best practices, and they're good to help you just get started, get an understanding of how IAM as an entity works. So that is the same thing with AWS config. If you're new, if you're comfortable with writing your own policy, because it follows a very specific structure to write a custom role, so you can opt to use the managed roles that already exist in the account. So as you can see, these managed roles, they actually extend over a number of services. So for example, let me find roles that are specifically for AWS EC2 or just for compute. So as you can see, some roles that I can actually set up for my EC2 approved AMIs. I can choose to limit that by tag. You can see there's actually quite a number of them. It's a large list. Auto scaling, CloudWatch, is CloudWatch set up for the instances and all that. Let's find something like EBS. So as you can see, the options for EBS, if I want to make sure my volumes are protected by a backup plan, if I want to make sure my volumes are encrypted, same as this. So all this, there's quite a number of functionalities that is readily available to you when you're starting out. So if the functionality that you're looking for is not available from the managed roles, then that's when you can move on to creating a custom role. But again, this is something that you need to read up on quite a bit, because it follows a very specific structure, and you need to understand the structure of a role. And just yes, then something else to note, something else that I absolutely loved about this, it's one, notice that for all the managed roles that exist, if I just scroll all the way to wherever. So one thing, it's first, it always tells you what it checks, and then on top of that, each of these roles will always give you the non-compliant scenario. It will always tell you at what point or in what situation will this role be regarded as non-compliant. So for example, for the account part of organization, this role will be non-compliant if the account that it is applied to is not part of AWS organization. um, Something like WAF enabled, it is non-compliant if WAF is not enabled. So all that, it's again, as I mentioned, this is again part of why using the AWS manager will be good for a beginner, because it will help you kind of ease the learning curve for working with all these roles and all that. So yeah, so that's it. That's a very basic overview of the roles. So let's find our role. So we want to set up a role that as I mentioned earlier, limits the size, not the number, the size of instances that can be launched in this account. So that should fall under EC2. I don't know the name of the role exactly, so I'm just going to search through the list. So EC2, let's see. Total scaling, code deploy, CloudWatch, and here we go. Desired instance type. So it checks if your EC2 instance are of a specific instance type, and it is non-compliant if the EC2 instance is not specified in the parameter list. So we'll encounter this in the next step. Then if you're not sure what kind of instance types are supported in your account, then you can check the guide. So I'm gonna go to next. The name is desired instance type. I'm okay with that, and then this is the name of the role. So this is one of the format specifications that you need to know if you're going to be writing custom config roles, in that the names are always written in this specific format in capital letters with underscores. Then there is always the other role that I mentioned, where it's first you have to, in the description of the roles, you need to mention what it checks, and as well you need to include an uncompliant clause. So let's move on with this one. The scope of changes, this is for resources. All resource categories, I want AWS resources. Then this would be AWS EC2 instance. Let's just find that. Awesome. Then let's see, parameters, instance type. So this is where you specify which instance type do you actually want to be supported um, for your account. So that is, yeah, so that's what the parameter is. So what you need to note here is that you can specify a very wide range of instances, because essentially what the value here is that it should be a CSV or a comma separated kind of a CSV list. So you're allowed to specify a number of instances in this single role. So you don't need to actually specify different roles for the different instance types that you want to allow in the account. You can do all of that in this single role. So for my case, I only want to allow, let's say, a nano. I want to allow a small, and finally a medium, nothing else. So what this means, it's a, anything, any instance size above a medium should not be allowed in this account, in my account. So let's go to the next. Review my role. I'm happy with it. Okay. So at the moment, as you can see, we have not set any remediation action. We've only created our role. So let's have a look at the role itself. There are no resources in my account. In this case, I don't have any EC2 instances running, so this role has not yet been invoked. That's why this is not available. So as soon as there is an instance, as soon as there is an evaluation that is conducted on this account, then we will see this changing to a specific time, which will indicate when the last evaluation was done. The resource type, it's for EC2 resources, and yeah. So I'm happy with all these, right? Yes, I'm happy with all these. So let's set up a remediation, right? And to start with, I'm going to leave it as a manual remediation. So that means if a resource that is non-compliant is set up in my account, it will simply just be marked on the config console. It will just simply be marked as non-compliant, but no action will be taken unless I choose to do something. So I'm going to say terminate. I want to terminate this instance, but because this is a manual remediation, I will need to log into the config console and then um, actually terminate it from this console. What that means is just the termination will not occur automatically. So if I don't do this myself, if I don't come into the console and actually click on the terminate, that instance would continue to run in the account. Just it will still be marked as non-compliant, but it will keep running. So let's just see this for now. Okay, then let's save that. Awesome. Oof. Okay, did this go through? Let's see. It seemed like the remediation action was actually success. The desired instance type has been updated. Awesome. There is high traffic. Let me just check. Okay. Okay. You know what, let's just test this. Hopefully the traffic issue will not affect it. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to move into my EC2 console, and I'm going to launch a large instance, and then we're going to see what happens. Okay, so as you can see, at the moment I have no instances that are running. So let's just call this test server. It's just not that serious. The instance type, any large. Let me take the T what? I'm gonna take the T3 large. T3 dot large. Yes, that's fine. Don't need the keyword. I can have the network can be defaults. That's not very important for this activity. Yeah, so let's just launch that instance and then see. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes to launch, and then we'll pick up from there. So our instance is still initializing, but let's just go to config and see if there's anything awesome. Okay, so as we can see, our rule has already picked up. So this is first thing is the status has changed. It's just evaluated 2 minutes ago. And then as you can see, the resource is now marked as non-compliant because this is a large instance and we're not allowing large instances for this particular account. So that's awesome, awesome, awesome. Let me just also please be done. Okay, you know what, before we move on to automatic remediation, I'm still just going to give this a couple of minutes to just finish initializing. Okay, awesome. So it's now done. So okay, let's go back to the config console. Our instance is still non-compliant. So remember we set this up for manual remediation. So that means I would need to um, come back to the config console and click on remediate. So if I click on remediate here, then the instance will be terminated because our remediate action was um, terminate the instance. So we're going to give this a few minutes and see if our immediate action actually works, and just to see if this instance so you can, as you can see, our immediate action is terminate EC2 instances. So if I click on remediate, this instance should be um, terminated from the EC2 console. So let's just give it a few minutes and see if it worked out before we look into setting up automatic remediation. Yep. So I honestly did not think this would be that fast. Okay, but as you can see now, our instance has been terminated. Awesome. Yes, it's been terminated. Okay. Um, so that's essentially it. So that's how manual termination, or sorry, manual remediation would work. So the next thing we're going to do, I want to set up automatic remediation. So I want this instance to be terminated automatically. And yes, it still terminates EC2 instances. Once it tries in 3, then parameters. So something to note with automatic remediations is that under the hood, AWS Config uses what we call system manager um, automation documents. And what that means, remember how, or rather in AWS, if you want a service to perform an action on your behalf, so for example, in this case, rather than I do the termination, I want another service to terminate that. So that means I need to set up a role for the service that I want to perform that action. So in this case, we would need to set up a role that will allow automation, SSM automation, to terminate an EC2 instance. And that is what we call the automation assume role. And you'll need to add in the ARN for this automatic remediation to work. We'll need to come in here and add the ARN of that role. And that is the only way that we can be able to set up automatic remediation for this role. Now, notes, just note, because this was a mistake that I initially did, it's that it's not config that does the remediation for this particular role. It's not config that does that, but rather it is systems manager automation. So the role, or rather there's usually a name, the principal, the principal in the trust policy will be system manager, not AWS config. So I had configured this role initially. So what I'm going to do is just walk you through the permissions that I configured for it, and then we can just take in the ARN for the role and add it to our config and test our automatic remediation. So let's go to the IAM console. Okay, so here we are on the IAM console. I do not know if I remember the name of the role. Let me see. SSM automation EC2. This would be it. Awesome. So this is my role. We're going to start by looking at the trust policy. So as you can see, the principal in my trust policy is SSM. This is SSM is system manager. Again, this is not config that is doing the remediation. It's system manager. So you need to set up system manager as the principal for your trust policy. Then if we look at the permission, so this is the policy, Amazon SSM automation role. So we're just going to have a look at what it does. So it gets access to EC2. Sorry, what did I do? Awesome. Okay, I prefer JSON. um, So if we look at the JSON policy, we can see all the action that is going to take. It uses Lambda under the hood, and then it allows access to EC2 instances, cloud formation. So because remember I used an AWS managed role. This is SSM automation role. It's a managed policy. So it has a number of actions, or rather it has a number of actions that are allowed. You can choose to limit this if you want to by creating a custom policy, but this will also serve you just okay. So if you wanted to understand a bit better what this particular managed policy will do, you can look at the policy itself, the JSON policy, and you can see all the resources that it has access to and all the actions that is being allowed for SSM. And also you can just see from the definition, or I think the description of the policy provides permission for automation to execute activities in automation documents. So one of the things that an automation document does is to automatically terminate instances. I think we can even just look at that. So let's go to system manager. Just a minute. So here we are on system manager. So it has quite a number of capabilities. So what we're interested in is the automation. Um, let's see what it's Alright, so these are from previous tests that I was doing with this, but essentially, one of the things that automation does, and this is the functionality that we want to use in our config role, is under instance management. You can set up automation to terminate your EC2 instances. So as you can see, AWS terminate EC2 instance. So this is what is being described by this. One of the to execute activities defined within automation document, specifically the terminate instance type. So that's essentially it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up my role. I keep forgetting the name of this role. SSM something. Yeah. So here's my role. I want the ARN. It is. Take that, paste that in, and then save my changes. So now I have set up automatic remediation for this particular role. So what we are going to do now is we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into my EC2 console. I'm going to launch a large instance, and we're going to see if it's going to be automatically terminated without me doing any sort of intervention. So test server 2, and then the other bit I'm interested in, it's the size. So I'm just going to launch another T3 large. Then I don't need any of these other thing. So one other thing that I need to explain is that so as I've mentioned, the automatic remediation is being done by system manager, and how system manager works is that it can only operate on what we call managed nodes. So for this instance to be automatically remediated or acted upon by system manager, it needs to be a system manager managed node. And how we do that is by appending a role which is called SSM. I think it's managed instance core or something, managed instance core. And what that does is that it automatically registers this instance that we are launching as an SSM managed a managed nodes. So as long as it is a managed nodes, it can be acted upon by system manager. So if we were to launch this instance without configuring it as a managed node for system manager, then that automatic remediation action, you'll notice that it will not actually work. So we need to make sure that the instances, if it's going because the remediation is being done by system manager, we need to make it a system manager managed unmanaged nodes. So again, I have this role configured, and I call it SSM role, and we can just have a look at these two. This one is a pretty simple one, SSM role. So essentially what it has, it's SSM managed instance call. So this is what you need, SSM managed instance call. So we are going to append that yes, we're going to add that role to our instance, and now I can launch this. And then we're just going to give it a few minutes to come up, and in the meantime we're going to see what's going to happen from the config end. I'm not gonna pause for this one. I want us to see exactly what happened. So our instance is running in initially, but you can see it's not yet initialized fully. Let's check on this end. So not yet, it's the instance has not been picked up yet. Gonna give it a few more minutes. Okay, so still initializing, still initializing. On our console, the resource has been picked up as non-compliant. So what I want to see if it's going to be automatically terminated. So let's still give it a few more minutes. Let's see what happens here. Let's see if these status checks will actually complete. Awesome. So as you can see, our instance is now being shut down. I didn't do anything. I didn't create on remediate. I didn't click on remediate. So this was done automatically by the remediation action that I set up. So now that we can see this non-compliant instance, it's been shut down automatically by AWS Config. So we've achieved our objective for this one. So that is one way that so that's how you can limit, rather. This is a way that you can limit the instance sizes that can be launched in your account. And more importantly, remember that config has a whole range of as I showed you earlier, it has a whole set of other roles that you can use, you can utilize for your account for different functionality. But this is one of the ways that you can set up governance and management for your account. So I hope this helped, and till the next one, cheers.